A controversial plan to mine the seabed off South Taranaki drew school kids, iwi environmentalists and Taranaki surfers out in protest today.
Trans-Tasman Resources has been trying to secure consent to mine iron sand from the seafloor for a decade, but its attempts have been continually knocked back.
Seabed mining's got to go! Seabed mining's got to go! Seabed mining's got to go!
We're going to keep fighting this project until seabed mining is banned here in Aotearoa.
Proposed seabed mining in Taranaki. It's been highly controversial and contentious.
This proposed activity has met widespread cross-spectrum opposition from society.
But not from the government. Seabed mining is now on its fast-tracked projects list. So Taranaki has now replied with a conscious uncoupling. The new regional development plan has just been launched and seabed mining is conspicuous in its absence.
Our goal is to say, actually, we can't sit there and wait for government to make things happen or wait for others. This is about what we can do.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the relaunch of Taranaki and the battle for the economic future of the district, seabed mining or offshore wind farming, government ministers versus regional leaders.
Look, there is a clear concern around the risk of incompatibility between seabed mining and offshore wind development, which Taranaki region has highlighted as an area that we want to see significant investment in and support for in the future.
The government says both mining and offshore wind can be done. New Plymouth District Mayor Neil Holdham clearly isn't convinced.
We don't have the ability to actually examine that risk because we're not the subject matter experts, but we have asked the government in terms of we've written a letter to Minister Shane Jones and Minister Simeon Brown, advising them that we've had this issue of the risk raised and asking them to look into it in terms of the policy decisions made out of Wellington.
What sort of response are you getting from them?
Well, we haven't had a response.
How frustrating is that as a mayor of a town, a big town, wanting to do good things and the frustration of not having the government on board?
Well, I think it's just something you learn to deal with. You know, the beehive marches to the beat of its own drum, and there's been historically a cynicism from Wellington to say, you know, Taranaki got this energy investment in the 80s and you're not getting anything else. But we've battled. And, you know, we've had some wins, we've had some losses. You just keep fighting the good fight and know that we're doing really good work, and it is an amazing place to live here. At the launch, I said, we don't have to make Taranaki great again. It's already awesome. This work is about protecting our way of life and ensuring that we can help New Zealand with its overarching goals around the environment and around its economy.
That launch he was referring to was the unveiling last week of the new regional development plan without seabed mining.
Tapuairawa, which was the project launched last week, talked about our commitment to growing our economy sustainably, our focus on energy, our focus on food, our focus on our Māori economy, and our burgeoning tourism economy. This is a piece of work that we've basically refreshed that reflects the decisions that we can take, the investments that we can make to improve the quality of life of everybody that lives here. And that's really been our focus, is the things where we actually have a say, because we've learned from past governments that governments will do whatever they want. And certainly, you know, one of the reasons that we've got a not as good an outlook as we expected to have is because, you know, the last administration made some really poor decisions around the energy policy. You know, we're the people that keep your lights on in the middle of winter. We've had to deal with really poor policy, and we're working across all the parties to get better policy. But ultimately, it's our energy sector that is reducing New Zealand's reliance on imported Indonesian coal. And the work that we're doing with the current government and hopefully the opposition to help them see sense is we're going to continue to invest in all elements of our energy sector, including oil and gas, so that New Zealand remains competitive. Because right now we're closing factories, we're putting up power prices, we're laying people off work, and we're burning coal with double the emissions of gas. So New Zealanders are relying on us to get it right.
So what's the region's problem with seabed mining? Why is it proving so divisive? For this, I spoke to local RNZ reporter Robin Martin, who has long covered the issue for and against.
We have one, very successful businessman, Phil Brown, who's got skin in the game. He'd say, we have to wake up and, this is an opportunity for us. So if it's done well, that would be his argument. He would say there's no reason why it can't be done well. Then it's a great opportunity for Taranaki, great for the port and all those marine services. Great opportunity. If we want to be seen as progressive and getting ahead in the world, we should be adopting this. On the other side, look, oil and gas is an extractive industry. There's loud voices saying we need to run this down. Climate change, the whole thing. This could strip the Patia reefs, which other people have done work at, and they've put divers down and videoed it, and there's way more life out there than you might imagine. It's not exactly the Great Barrier Reef, but there's a lot going on, and that would be put at risk. Do we want to risk that? The feeling on the ground would be, from the regional leaders, is we don't want to risk that. And others would say, well, we're letting an economic opportunity go by.
So Trans-Tasman Resources, owned by Australia's Manuka Resources, wants to vacuum 50 million tonnes of sand every year for 35 years to extract valuable vanadium and iron and titanium. It would suck up almost 180,000 tonnes of sand a day, going 11 metres deep in the shallow waters off Patia.
Trans-Tasman Resources says that 22 k's offshore from here at Patia, a $1 billion project is waiting to be approved. It says it would employ 350 people directly and support 1,600 jobs across the country.
TTR first sought consent back in 2013 but has been knocked back time and again. Greenpeace has been leading the vocal opposition.
The South Taranaki Bight is home to really precious creatures like a distinct species of pygmy blue whales, endangered Maui dolphins, and also kurora, little blue penguins. And Trans-Tasman Resources is proposing to mine 50 million tonnes of the seabed each year for 35 years and then dump the majority of that back into the ocean, which will obviously have impacts on these precious creatures, both on the seafloor and in the ocean more generally.
Seabed mining has got offside with iwi in particular, and the South Taranaki District Council has also been quite vocal in their criticism of it, and the Taranaki Mayoral Forum as well, not hugely in favour of it at this stage.
Because talk us through how contentious or controversial has the seabed mining plan been over the years?
Yeah, look, Ngāti Ruanui, Greenpeace, Kiwis Against Seabed Mining, the fishing industry, and various other kind of players have raised concerns about it from the get-go. Essentially, if my reading of it with Ngāti Ruanui in particular, which is the iwi which has fought it longest and hardest, is like they work hand in glove with oil and gas companies all the time nowadays. They have done for quite a long time, and that essentially requires the oil and gas companies to lay their cards on the table, bring their planning documents to Ngāti Ruanui, who share it with their planners, and they work together and they go ahead with mostly redevelopment these days, additional pieces of work based on top of what's already there. And that's the kind of relationship that they've built up in more modern times. If you take it from Ngāti Ruanui's perspective, when the seabed miners came along, so they've got these permits out in the South Taranaki Bight and they've done their prospecting. They say there's a resource out there that they want to exploit. So when they started coming up with more concrete plans about how that would be done, iwi wanted to see how that would be done and figure out what the implications of that would be. Now they, obviously I wasn't in the room, but they would say that Trans-Tasman Resources wasn't able to do that, was not happy to do that. And that's, so the relationship just got off to a bad start, probably more than a decade ago.
No, I can't believe we're still here, and we probably wouldn't be here if we didn't have a government that was so intent on fast track or effectively shortcut politics.
And Ngāti Ruanui are getting tired of the fight. Iwi Chair Hamoana Maruera telling the lawyers representing the mining company, we've had enough.
Though They came in, so Trans-Tasman Resources, one of the flip sides of it, Robin, is they are saying the economic benefit for the region will be huge. It'll provide employment, it'll bring money into the region. Being ignored or being left out of plans, how damaging is that, especially economically?
Well, what they're saying, Trans-Tasman Resources, which has more recently been bought out by a group called Manuka out of Australia, they want to mine 50 million tonnes of seabed a year, and they pick up a huge amount of the seabed and they sift it out and then they drop it back on the floor. So they're essentially saying that they can, they were previously saying they could generate $1 billion a year. They've kind of backtracked on that. But what they've said locally is that will create 300 jobs in Taranaki, and those would be direct employees, people who were working out of New Plymouth, Hawera and Patea, and another 170 indirect around the province, and the company will spend about $250 million in the region. So that's a big deal, especially as we've seen oil and gas back off. Our regional GDP has dropped from being the highest in the country in 2018, and we're now fourth behind Auckland, Wellington and Southland. Southland's the big region on the march these days.
So how do you replace that? What industry replaces this in your district?
I think the big play here, what our local authorities or the stakeholders who are involved in putting this plan together, what they're really putting their chips down on is offshore wind energy.
The iwi engagement officer for an ambitious plan to place 65 wind turbines off the coast of South Taranaki says it could be a hard sell for local Māori. The New Zealand Superannuation Fund and CIP is teaming up with a Dutch conglomerate for the $5 billion project, which they say could supply 10% of New Zealand's energy needs.
Several companies have come forward with plans for offshore wind. We've had one drop out recently, Bluefloat. But there's a giant one, the Taranaki Offshore Partnership, which is the pension fund in collaboration with Copenhagen. They want to put 70 giant turbines out in the same area as the seabed miners, and this is one of the big conundrums here. So they want to put it out there. They're talking about a $50 billion net worth for the country by 2050. They're saying they're industry-wide, not just Taranaki Offshore Partnership, but they're talking about 10,000 jobs created during the construction phase if a number of these projects go ahead, and 2,000 jobs. And I was reading earlier that maybe more specifically in Taranaki we could be looking at 600 jobs during construction and 100 jobs in South Taranaki. So that could go quite a way to filling the gap as oil and gas backs off. And what you'd also see is a lot of people in the oil and gas industry might have skills that can transfer over, especially all the stuff going out to sea, tenders and people who are used to working in the marine environment. I would say that's what our region is banking on or hoping for. That would be the great one. And of course the two clash. So in a sense, this Tapawaeroa action plan that we saw released last week, we're favouring offshore wind development. I mean, I asked Neil Volsky, who's the chair of the Mayoral Forum, why seabed mining wasn't on there, because, they'd adopted the catch cry of adapt or perish. Well, this is one form of adaptation, and he just said, the consensus wasn't behind it, so therefore it didn't make the cut for the plan.
Have you heard from TTR since the plans come out and the fact that they're not a part of it? No word from them on that?
No, I think he would say he's not surprised, but it doesn't change anything. I was at a Taranaki Regional Economic Summit 7 days before the plan was released, and that's Regional Development Minister Shane Jones travelling around the country. He's got some money to spend, but also he wanted to pitch his vision. And he essentially said the two biggest levers to get the Taranaki economy back off the ropes and back thriving again are seabed mining and reviving offshore oil and gas exploration. So it's almost like completely at odds with what the regional leaders came up with a week later.
That side of the house with chilling effect, stopping investment, scaring overseas existing investors away and destroying industry in New Zealand. And for what? For what? This faint green vision that somehow we can keep the lights on with unicorn kisses. Impossible!
Robin Martin says what won't be impossible for Taranaki's economy is boosting tourism. Only about 6% of the total number of tourists head to the region, and also the diversification of agriculture.
Ngāti Ruanui, who's had the issues with seabed mining, have been quite proactive on their own land in South Taranaki developing berry farms, because they're just picking that the climate's going to get warmer here and that'll be viable, blueberries, raspberries, etc. Tourism is, Taranaki is still kind of like a tourism backwater, and of course we've got a beautiful national park here, Te Papakura o Taranaki, and Taranaki Maunga, everybody knows it, and there's wonderful tracks there, and quite a lot of work being put on up there via previously the PGF, about $13 million in upgrading tracks to create this Taranaki crossing experience. So those are things that people are thinking about. And in this document the other day, there was talks. We're still very keen on the energy sector. Like we have the new energy centre Araake, which looks at, it's kind of innovative, really funky new energy technologies. Like, I never knew you could do this, but you can transmit electricity through the air. It doesn't have to go down a wire or stuff like that. So they looked at things like that. They're also looking at carbon storage, which I always sometimes I think carbon storage is it's kind of like an excuse to carry on doing what we're doing. So essentially you can put the carbon that we don't want to go in the air, you can capture it. And the idea is you put it down the wells where the gas came out of in the first place. And that those technologies exist and they're being investigated.
You sound quite excited as a local Taranaki resident, as a local Taranaki man. Are you excited with the way this plan is heading?
I think people behind these things need to be given some credit for actually thinking about it and making a plan, because I think that's the fear, is if you switch just gets turned off, what are we going to do next? So you have to start planning now, because, the oil and gas one in particular, regardless of whether the revoking of the offshore exploration ban results in work kicking back in, because that's not a given yet either. You have to start making an effort to think about what we can do in the future. Remote work, the world is changing, people can project manage something from Taranaki for a company in Auckland or in Tauranga if they want to live here. You have to be a little bit flexible in your thinking about how these things could work. And that's where I kind of think that they've done good work here. It's easy to say it's a talk fest or another report, but behind the scenes, people are working hard to think about, okay, how can we do things differently, and what's going to be the next thing that keeps us ticking over? Because, the population, might be changing, the world situation is changing a bit, but they're predicting a population growth here of about 1,000 people a year. I know that's kind of not much when you think of Auckland or other places, but if you drop 1,000 more people into, especially if they're going to be mostly around New Plymouth, you've got to find jobs for them, you've got to find homes for them, and you've got to keep wanting the place to be an attractive place to live. And, that's another thing I would say, as a young man, I guess it's normal as a young man, growing up here, I couldn't wait to get out of Taranaki, out of New Plymouth. I think nowadays there's a lot more reasons to stay. We embrace the ocean more. We embrace our tangata whenua more. We embrace the mountain more. But we're going to need those jobs, or else, the people aren't going to come.
Sell it to us. Sell Taranaki to us in one sentence. Robin?
Look, it's another beautiful part of the country. I know there are lots of other beautiful parts of the country, but it's a 5-minute drive from anywhere in town to the centre of the city. You can mostly get a park. We look out to the Tasman Sea. You can get along the walkway here. You can drive down the coast and jump in world-class surf. If it's the winter and a bit of the white stuff drops on the mountain, you can be in the surf in the morning, on the mountain by mid-morning, and just surrounded by beautiful parks and, not too many malls.
New Plymouth Mayor Neil Holdham added you can buy a house for under $1 million. The education system is fantastic and there's plenty of sunshine.
I think Taranaki's got a really bright future. And we're doing a lot of work to mitigate some of the risks to our economy. But at the same time, we're capitalising on the strengths that we've got here. And we've got incredible people with amazing talents and there's a real entrepreneurial spirit. We've got risk takers who've really made things happen and will continue to make things happen. So I'm really optimistic about the future of the region, and as long as we continue to work together and collaborate and have a good set of values that pay something forward for the next generation, we'll be fine.
And do you have a message at all for the current government?
Yeah, I think it's that, look at our contribution to New Zealand's GDP and also the impact that we have in terms of anchoring the energy sector during those cold, dry winters. And we're wanting to work with you. And this is also my message to the opposition, right? We share your environmental aspirations, but we want to solve these things with really good thought out science, economics and planning to deliver for everybody. We're part of NZ Inc. and really proud of it. We like contributing to the rest of New Zealand, and we always want to be constructive in the way we work with everybody.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Neil Holdham and Robin Martin. This episode was produced by Davina Zimmer and Alexia Russell and engineered by Phil Benj. I'm Amanda Gillies. Mā te wā.